I like to say sometimes there is more spirit in a pint than there is in a pew.
Amen. You're listening to Good Faith Weekly. I'm Mitch Randall.
And I'm Missy Randall.
We're here each week exploring the intersection of faith and culture
We find people who stand up, speak out, and step forward.
for inclusion, freedom, and justice for all.
It's time for Good Faith Weekly.
Brought to you by Good Faith Media. Welcome to Good Faith Weekly. On this episode, Missy and I are going to catch up. Then later on the pod, we sat down with Reverend Dr. Brian Henderson, who is the Executive Director of the Association of Welcoming and Affirming Baptists. And we've got a new podcast that we want to introduce you to called The Voice of the Turtle. It's a great pod, so stay tuned. Hello there, Missy.
Hey, how are you?
I'm well, and you?
Well, I'm currently away in Texas cosplaying as a drug dealer this week. So,
Okay. Some explanation, please.
yeah, so I'm in Texas caring for a family member who has just had major surgery. And yes, so my life in the last few days has been procuring prescriptions, doling them out, making sure we stay on time with our meds. And yeah, it's quite a job, let me tell you.
I have always said you are the Clara Barton of Good Faith Media, so well done.
Oh, have you?
Yes,
Have you now?
always.
Nice. Yes. So, but the situation I'm currently in, again, caring for someone who is recovering from surgery
Mhm.
has kind of made me think about something. You know, when you have any sort of medical procedure, you have to sign forms before you go in saying that you won't make any major
That
decisions
is
for a certain
correct.
amount of
I
time when
can
you're
verify.
recovering. Yeah, part of that's because obviously you're on medication, you've got stuff in your system. But the other thing I feel like is just because your body, your sleep cycle gets so out of whack. And that's
Yeah,
one thing that I've been, learning here in this moment is that someone who, yeah, is recovering because you're just up and down all
sure.
night, and so you're not really thinking super clearly.
Yeah.
And so it makes sense that you wouldn't be making major life decisions, signing paperwork, sending your country into war. I don't know, just a few things. Um,
Wow, that took a turn.
so so you know, totally
Yeah,
unrelated.
yeah,
Did you
yeah.
see how many times our president tweeted during the night the other
I don't
night?
know how many times, but I've seen some of the more obscene posts that he made. But yeah, tell me how many.
Between 9:49 PM and 4:10 AM, I believe there were 12 truths, and it's
12
important to get the
truths.
air quotes in there, 12 truths
Yes, 12 truths.
posted. Of course, one of those, getting major attention was the meme with our president,
Mhm.
says he's cosplaying as a physician,
Yeah, crazy.
but,
Yeah.
pretty sure that's not the
Yeah,
intent
yeah,
of
so
that. But
he
anyways.
does, he makes this post and, the image is clear. He's making himself look like Jesus, which is probably in response to Pope Leo's criticism of him. And as some other comedians have pointed out, when the Pope criticizes you, Trump's immediate reaction is always to level it up. And the only way he can level up being the Pope is being Jesus himself. And so he he puts this meme out there and then gets a lot of criticism by some of his supporters about being blasphemous. And I thought that was interesting in itself.
It is very interesting, and I've been largely away from headlines for a few days for the reasons I just told you, but I did see, this list of how many times he, tweeted during the night, and it just, again, made me think of kind of my life right now and being up and down all night and knowing that, you're just not in a real good headspace if you're not sleeping well. But, yeah, I have heard that some of his supporters didn't like that. I would say that the church community I grew up in, if that had happened back then, it would have been outcry of just disgust. So
Yeah,
I don't know why this was the one thing of all the things you and I've talked about of is
right.
this the thing? Is this the thing? Like I'm so I don't know.
Yeah, I do appreciate the fact that they are calling him out on this particular post that he made. But there again, this is what they're outraged about, not the fact that he's been tied to, Jeffrey Epstein and possibly sex trafficking and, sexual
Convicted
assault. I mean,
felon. He's
convicted
sending
felon,
our
lie. I mean, continuous lie. I mean, just
all the
the
things.
list is just endless. So after all of those things, he posts this stupid
You
meme.
dress up like Jesus,
Now they're
and
outraged. It
get
just
hell for
makes
it.
no sense
I mean,
whatsoever.
granted, it was awful. I
Oh,
mean,
it's horrible.
but
Yeah.
anyways.
Yeah.
So that's neither here nor there, but just something I kind of wanted to note as I've been thinking about that this week while I'm up and down all night doling
Well,
out medication.
well,
Yeah.
I think that from now on, whoever the next president is, that we need to make them sign a document stating that if they are on medication or if they cannot get a good night's rest, that they should not be making those type of decisions.
I mean, just my 2 cents.
Yeah, I think that's a good 2 cents. I like it.
Okay, so while I've been out of the news cycle
Mhm.
this week
Yeah.
again, I have had some time to kind of think about things at all hours of the night
That's
while I've
always
been
dangerous for me.
Yeah, it's very, very dangerous while I've been, dispensing the drugs. Remember last week when we were talking about whatever other chaos was happening in the world?
Mhm.
And I mentioned that I just felt like in my current crisis of faith that I feel like has been going on forever now and has no sign of ending, that, I just felt like played for a team that I thought was one thing and then the team got sold,
Right.
and that team is now infected with
Mhm.
something I can no longer ascribe to. And
That's a
so
great analogy.
at what point do you have to walk away from the team
Mhm.
because it no longer represents anything that you are?
Mhm.
So after that, we went down to Dallas and you preached at Perkins Seminary, which is located on the campus of SMU. And you preached this sermon about kind of why, you're having a hard time with a Christian faith. And you give this whole litany of reasons why the church has been so terrible, to Native American or to all indigenous peoples, to Africans,
Right.
and all this stuff. And then you actually kind of made a very good case at the end, which I was a little bit annoyed about, as to like why you choose to still follow this person of Jesus. And then
Right.
so I was, yeah, like I said, I was a little irritated. But um and then we come upon this interview today with Brian
Mhm.
Henderson of AWAB, and he just makes another case again to where I'm like, all right, you guys are convincing me that maybe, I don't totally walk away. I mean, it's the institution that I don't like,
Right.
but obviously the teachings and the ethics and the morals and all of these things that we feel that Jesus represented, I can do, right?
Yeah.
Can be okay with this. However, I'm just struggling with something else.
Mhm.
As you talked about in your sermon, people who have been mistreated, marginalized, abused, enslaved, all of these things by the institutional church. And then as we talk about LGBTQ plus individuals and what all they've experienced from the church, I have kind of 2 questions swimming around in my mind. One is just the kind of like really perplexing thought of why this group of people still yearns to be part of the church. We've talked about that before. I believe we've talked about that on this podcast. But secondly, I'm having a hard time because at what point do you feel like you're asking someone who has been in an abusive relationship to stay in that relationship?
Right.
And I don't know that there's an easy or a right answer, but it's something I'm struggling with because, I hear you again, your sermon was phenomenal. We don't have a recording of it, unfortunately. And then Brian does such a good job in the interview today of, kind of helping us see that desire and what it means to be part of the larger, faith community. But it's just something I'm struggling with. Like, are we trying to convince people who have been abused by the church to stay in an abusive relationship?
Right. Well, I think those are legitimate questions, and I think honest concerns that a lot of people have. And as you indicated, in my sermon, I talked about those groups of people that you mentioned, but and then conclusion, and also you also made me happy. The fact that I was able to challenge you and irritate you at the same time, that is always a win in my column.
All right, fine.
But the whole idea is that when indigenous people and descendants of slaves and other ethnic groups of people read or were introduced and then read the story about Jesus, they began to identify with this person. Indigenous people saw Jesus as an indigenous person. Africans saw Jesus as a tribal person because he was not part of the establishment. He was, Bruce Chilton's words, a mamzer, an outsider, an outcast. And so he was subversive, not only as a person, but his teachings were subversive. And so he was constantly critical of the establishment, those who had power, those who practiced injustices in the world, and he was searching for inclusivity as well as justice. And so, when those people who were being treated so poorly, even by those people who were professing to follow Jesus, when they read Jesus, they saw themselves in this person. And so they continue to gravitate towards this Jesus character. Now, your question has to do with the institution, and I think
Right.
that is a legitimate question, because you and I have talked about, the trials of the church and the injustices of the church throughout history and even today. And I don't know if there's a good answer, and I don't know if I have a good answer for you. The only thing that I can truly come up with is that there still is this deep need for community. Now, the reality is you can find community elsewhere, and people are doing that. People are finding community,
Mhm.
sacred community outside the traditional church, and we see that all the time. At the same time, there still is this gravitational pull for some reason towards the sacredness of a church community. And I don't know if that is something that's so instilled into us at an early age that we feel like we just always are constantly gravitating towards that. But there is this pull towards the quote unquote church. And
Mhm.
if we think about it logically, if Jesus was subversive, if Jesus was an outcast, here's what I conclude: the church has forgotten its identity. The
Mhm.
church now believes that it is a community of the privileged,
Yeah.
when from its very beginning, it's always been a community of outcasts, or in the words of an old Christmas show, it's been the island of misfit toys. That
Right.
is the church. And so when people who feel like they're on the outskirts of things read the Gospels, understand the true identity of Jesus, and that is the community that they read about in the Gospels, then they want to be a part of that type of community. The problem is when they walk through the doors of the church today, it's not a community of misfit toys. It's not a community of outcasts. It has become a community of the privileged. And that, to me, is what we're dealing with today.
And I think just to a clarifier, that's generalization
It is
because
a total generalization.
we
Thank you.
should
Yeah.
hashtag not all churches at this
Right,
point.
right.
But like I said to my point last week, at what point do you say, okay, it's still as an institution that team has been sold and I'm not sure I can align with it anymore. But you brought up a point in a Q&A last week, kind of like you alluded to a moment ago, that there's still, when something happens in life, people still gravitate towards that physical space
Mhm.
of the church, which is interesting. And I do it too. And I
Yeah.
can't explain it, but there's still that just innate need for that community, for that sacred space, for that kind of, I don't know, sometimes you walk into a space and it's like going into grandma's, like it's kind of a warm hug, like give me an Afghan and a cookie or something like that. And that sometimes is the way that the church feels in times where you need that. And I don't have any explanation for it. It's something I experience, but it's also something I'm rebelling against and something I'm challenged by and annoyed by, much like you. Um, anyways, it's just this whole seesaw in my mind of, as obviously as a woman, I mean, there's ways in which, I've been harmed by the church, not nearly what a lot of people have experienced, but it's there.
Right.
And yet, why do I still just have some sort of pull towards it? Why do I still, opt to engage with it? And some days I don't have a good answer. And other days I'm okay with the fact that, my faith and my faith journey is separate from that institution. That doesn't mean there's not a building or a group of people that call themselves a church that I might not find a home with.
Mhm.
It's just sometimes it's tricky.
Yeah. And I think that's an excellent point. And, as you and I have talked about, there's something about the biblical narrative, especially for you that still draws you into that narrative. Because when you learn about the true story of Hagar, for example, or Esther, or Deborah, or Mary Magdalene, you learn about these incredible female characters in the Bible, and they're easy to gravitate to. They too were ostracized. They too were kicked out of community. But at the same time, they're in the story. And so as you read the story, you begin to gravitate towards those characters as well. It's this drawing in of the narrative that is really remarkable to me. But I can't answer your question. I really wish I could.
Well, thanks.
But I think that's important. Also to realize there are no clear-cut answers to all this stuff. We're all struggling through this together. And I think your questions are more prevalent than anybody realizes.
And, my guess is I would love to talk to somebody sometime that this isn't specific to the Christian faith.
Oh, yeah.
That there, obviously, as we know, there are lots of representations of, Muslim communities that are not painted in a good light. And so
Mhm.
I wonder if there are people in that faith tradition that kind of have some of these same kinds of struggles or not. I don't know. I no longer ascribe to a theology that says this is the only way to have an expression of
Right.
faith. So I would love to have some of those conversations.
Yeah.
I don't know that I'll ever get an opportunity to, but I would love to, just to see kind of how somebody else wrestles with some of the contradictions in what I feel like my faith and my ethic is versus what the institution is representing.
Yeah. I would imagine that they too deal with these things simply for
Right.
the fact that we all forget that whatever faith tradition we practice or don't practice, at the very core, we're all human. And these are very
Right.
human emotions and reactions that we have to what's going on in the world. So I would imagine that, yes, every faith tradition has have these questions looming in their heart and mind.
Yeah, I think you're right, which irritates me even more. But I do think you're right.
Well, Missy, one of these communities that we are talking about is part of our interview today, where you sit down with the Reverend Dr. Brian Henderson, who leads the Association of Welcoming and Affirming Baptist, which sounds like an oxymoron, but it's not.
You can't make it make sense, right?
No, in fact, we are really excited about talking to Brian today because we are in a collaboration with AWAB, as it's better known, to produce and release a podcast that's recently gone out called The Voice of the Turtle. And so you and I got a chance to visit with him, and it's a delightful time anytime we get to talk to Brian.
Yeah, like I said, it's a great conversation. He, like you, make me question my desire to run away from the institutional church, which, again, it's very annoying, but here we are.
We'll be right back with Brian Henderson.
You know, Missy, I really enjoy recording this podcast with you each and every week.
Do you?
Well, but this is not the only thing we do at Good Faith Media.
It's not. We have so many offerings for you. We have a plethora of podcasts, videos, news and opinion articles, Bible studies, books, and much, much more. Find us at goodfaithmedia.org.
Welcome back to Good Faith Weekly. On this episode, we've got a very special guest with us. The Reverend Dr. Brian Henderson is an ordained American Baptist minister with more than 25 years of pastoral experience and a lifelong commitment to building churches fully welcome and affirm LGBTQ plus people. He has been part of the Association of Welcoming and Affirming Baptists, better known as AWAB, since 2019, serving on both the board and staff. And in 2024, he stepped into the role as full-time executive director. AWAB has just launched a new podcast in conjunction with Good Faith Media titled The Voice of the Turtle. Brian, welcome to Good Faith Weekly.
Thank you, Mitch and Missy. It is good to be with the two of you. It's great to finally be here. And what a special day, 299.
I know.
Or 298.
299.
Yeah,
yes,
episode
that is-
299.
you are
We're
here
knocking on the
299.
door of 300.
Good.
Well,
I mean, I can come back next week if you want. We can do three.
There you go. Well, Brian, thanks for joining us today. If nothing else, this podcast is a great way for us to just hang out with friends and chat. So we're excited about talking to you today. But as you know, at most institutions around our globe, we kind of swim in a land of acronyms, and we are no different from that. So let's talk about AWAB before we talk about your new podcast. And I want to start off by saying, if I was doing word association, welcoming and affirming and Baptist would not be two words I would put together. So talk to us about AWAB and make it make sense.
Yeah, thank you. AWAB, the Association of Welcoming and Affirming Baptists, has been around since 1993, so over 30 years now. And you're exactly right, Missy. I can remember being at a Pride festival several years ago, and I was representing a Baptist church, and the church had a booth at the festival and had all of their swag and everything out and signs indicating how welcoming and affirming the congregation was. And there was this middle-aged person that came by, and they stopped and they looked and they got really quiet and they looked at some of us in the tent, and then they said, "Baptist, gay, welcome." We don't usually put those words together. And we're like, "You're exactly right. That's why we're here." So yeah, so AWAB has been around to create space for largely our Baptist congregations to know that as they themselves take on that commitment to be welcoming and affirming of all. Some churches say open to all, closed to none, particularly the LGBTQ plus community. AWAB has been around to help churches step into that space and to break that idea, that perception that people have had that you can't be welcoming and affirming of LGBTQ plus and Baptist at the same time. In reality, LGBTQ plus people have always been a part of Baptist communities, right? And so AWAB wants to do what we can to help normalize for folk what already is normal. And yet, sadly, because of some of our Baptist cousins, that reputation, that perception lives on. And AWAB wants to do what we can to help change that.
Unpack that a little bit further for us, Brian, in talking about historic foundational Baptist ideology and why that does make sense for LGBTQ plus people, for all people to be welcome under that umbrella.
Yeah, so I think, Missy, you're inviting me to talk about Baptist freedoms, right? And
I
so
might be.
if we are true to our Baptist roots, at least the Baptist roots that Walter Sheridan reminds us of, those roots rooted in those four fragile freedoms: church freedom, soul freedom, Bible freedom, and religious freedom. And in those freedoms, I think we are freed to be fully who we are as human beings. And in some ways, I would argue with folk that why wouldn't you want to be a Baptist? Because at our best, Baptists invite individuals to be freely and fully who we each are, no matter who we love, how we identify. And so, yeah, for me, it is exciting to be Baptist, to be myself personally an openly gay man, and to know that I can be who I am and be connected to a church community that I have an affinity with and that gives me a sense of meaning and identity in significant ways.
And that's exactly why I love AWAB so much. First, as you indicated in your first answer, that AWAB has been around for decades now, which, a lot of people don't realize. I think if you begin to stop and think about it, as you said a while ago, I mean, there have been gay people in the church forever. And AWAB was a response to, hey, let's create safe community for this group of people within the church. And then also pairing it with Baptist freedoms is always exciting to me, as I grew up in the Baptist tradition as well. Well, Brian, let's talk about the podcast, The Voice of the Turtle. First of all, cool name. You're going to have to explain it to us. And then second, what can listeners glean from this upcoming season?
Sure. So, Voice of the Turtle is the original name of a newsletter that was produced by a group of welcoming and affirming Baptists, while AWAB was formed and started officially in 1993. Back in 1973, there was a group of Baptists who came out of American Baptist tradition who formed what was called American Baptist Concern. And it was really a group to create some safe spaces for largely, at that point in time, closeted gay clergy, seminarians, and members of Baptist churches who wanted to be in solidarity with others like them. And so the Voice of the Turtle became the newsletter that was sent all over the country back in the days when it was run off in someone's home, and then volunteers got together and folded it and stapled it and put mailing address labels on it and stamps and then dropped it in the mail. Newsletters today for us at AWAB happen very differently. But back then, Voice of the Turtle, that was the way folk communicated and shared with each other resources and about events and places to be and ways in which they could connect with each other. But Voice of the Turtle, the slogan that went with it was little by little, a turtle sticks out its neck. And the idea was people were being invited to stick out their neck for who they were. And that was hard for folk to do. But Voice of the Turtle, that name stuck. And all these years later, AWAB living into its history and wanting to remember some of our history, we felt what better way to name a podcast than by using a title of a newsletter that has been a part of our welcoming and affirming history, going back almost a half a century. So yeah, and we want to continue to encourage people today to stick out their necks, to do together what none of us can do on our own.
That's amazing. And so what can listeners expect to glean from the podcast? We've got 2 episodes that have already dropped. So tell us a little bit about what people are going to learn when they tune into the Voice of the Turtle.
Yeah, that's right. So this first season, thanks to you, Mitch and Missy, and to Good Faith Media, we are digging into our past. We are telling the story of welcoming and affirming ministry in Baptist life, going back to 1973. In fact, there's one story that I love to tell, and I like to say sometimes there is more spirit in a pint than there is in a pew.
Amen.
Think about that, right?
We need that on a shirt. You heard it here.
I share that story because, believe it or not, the welcoming and affirming movement in Baptist life began at a bar, a small bar in Lincoln, Nebraska, of all places. A pastor and 2 seminarians sat there, all 3 of them gay identifying, gay men, and they realized that they shared something in common. And what they shared was hard for them publicly to talk about and to be out about. And so AWAB goes back to that bar in Lincoln. And ever since then, we've been doing what we do. And so Voice of the Turtle is going to help us in our first season to stick at our neck. And we want to tell the story of what's been happening over the last 50 years. So we will hear from C. Delane II, who is the author of Finding a Home Among Baptists, which tells the story of AWAB, and that book is available to purchase. But then from Delane, we will speak to one of those individuals who was at that bar in Lincoln, Nebraska, Rick Mixon, and hear his version of what happened then and how over the years welcoming and affirming ministry has evolved. And largely, while there have always been challenges, Rick has a story of how positively things have come along. And then we're going to switch gears a little bit and hear from a scholar that many of us probably know, Cody Sanders.
Oh, Cody's a friend of the pod. So yes, absolutely.
He is, yes. And so Cody is going to share with us from his perspective, from the seminary's perspective, about how we can continue to engage in thoughtful ways, in academically informed ways, welcoming and affirming ministry still today. And we're going to switch gears again and then visit with Cliff Matthews, who's pastor of the historic St. Luke Missionary Baptist Church in Charlotte, North Carolina. And we're going to hear from Cliff about how welcoming and affirming ministry has evolved and how it continues to need to evolve within the Black church tradition. We'll hear from Brandon Crowley, pastor of another historic African-American congregation, as well as from Junia Joplin. She is going to share with us a bit about her Baptist experience and what life and ministry within welcoming and affirming circles is like north of the northern border of our country, up in Canada. And then Susan Shaw will visit with Professor Susan Shaw as she shares with us a bit about a lecture that she gave for AWAB a few years ago, revisiting truths and lies at the foot of the cross. And then we'll also be very fortunate to hear from another Baptist name, Paul Rauschenbusch, as Paul shares with us not only his own experience as an out gay man within Baptist life, but with his work with the Interfaith Alliance based out of Washington, D.C. We'll hear what welcoming and affirming ministry is like and how it's evolved in interfaith circles over the years. So I'm excited, if you can't tell, and I can't wait for our episodes to drop. By the time you've heard this podcast, two of our podcasts will have dropped, and there'll be more coming this season.
Well, that's a great lineup. Well, I cannot wait to tune in.
So, Brian, I am always up for going back to the bar. So thank you for that. And I just love the fact that the podcast is hearkening back to a time before I was even born.
Oh, God, that hurts.
Okay, thank you.
So technically, Missy, I just celebrated my 52nd birthday. Technically, that bar experience happened a year before I was born, too. So you're not alone.
Yeah. Okay. How about you?
I was alive.
I know.
Brian, as you know, so much going on within LGBTQ plus rights currently. And while I wish we could say that AWAB's work and that your work is primarily celebratory, unfortunately, that's not the case. We're still working. But from pride flags to trans athletes to many other angles, it's just everyone in this community is under attack. So before we talk about specifics, let's kind of take a step back from a 30,000-foot view. Why do you think there's such a resurgence of a backlash against this community? Can you speak to that a little bit?
A good question, Missy. Back in 2013, AWAB was celebrating its 20th anniversary. And at that anniversary celebration, there was a longtime supporter of AWAB that stood up and said, I'm excited to be here, and I'm glad that we are celebrating 20 years of ministry. But 20 years from now, I hope AWAB doesn't even need to exist. It was the right thing to say, and you could tell in the room there was some energy around that aspiration. But as I sat there, I also thought to myself, you know what? Probably 20 years from now, AWAB and organizations like it, and there are others like AWAB out there serving other faith communities, they're still going to be needed.
Yeah.
The AWABs are still going to be needed. And so here we are. Not 20 years later, only 10 years later, and we are being reminded very, very significantly every day of how work such as AWAB does is needed. And history repeats itself, doesn't it? And just when we think that progress is being made, we take 2 steps forward and then 3 steps back. Politically, I'm not qualified to speak into this too much, but politically, there always needs to be some individuals, some segments of the society that need to be marginalized. And for whatever reason, LGBTQ plus folk are often those that are marginalized. At least that's how it's been in the United States. And within the LGBTQ community itself, sadly, frustratingly, our trans and non-binary siblings tend to get the brunt of the negativity that comes out of administrations such as we're experiencing today.
Yeah. One of those issues, Brian, recently the United States Supreme Court ruled against the state of Colorado in their ban of conversion therapy. AWAB came out with a very strong statement. You all did a terrific job. We posted it at goodfaithmedia.org. So can you talk a little bit about the ramifications of that case? Because we've been working on trying to reveal the dangers of conversion therapy for quite some time now. But here we are with the U.S. Supreme Court now basically saying it's okay for states to allow this to happen in their states. So can you talk about conversion therapy? First of all, just real briefly, what it is and what can our listeners do to advocate for the removal of conversion therapy in their communities?
Mm-hmm. So let me just say right out of the gate, Mitch and Missy, conversion therapy is wrong. Yeah. Conversion therapy is bad. Conversion therapy is evil. It does not change people. People cannot be changed from being who they are. And at its simplest level, conversion therapy is a therapy contrived by individuals with religious convictions that are poorly contrived to try to change someone into being someone that they're not, from being LGBTQ queer identifying to quote unquote straight. And that can't be done. And the mental, physical, social, religious harm that has been done to individuals, especially younger people, youth, over the years is just absolutely horrific. And so AWAB wants individuals to know that conversion therapy is not a therapy that should be practiced. We want to help individuals live into the fullness of their reality. And it is sad, and this is how it often happens, right? Politics and religion get in bed together, and they are used to convince people to believe in something that isn't
Right.
scientifically realistic or real.
Yeah.
So, Brian, another, institution that might be under threat for LGBTQ plus people is the right to marry. So, are you concerned with this latest decision and with kind of the temperature, like you mentioned, of politics and religion getting into bed together? Analogy intended. Are you concerned that the Roberts Court will now go after the right for same-sex couples to marry?
I think anything is up for grabs at this point in time. The Biden administration attempted with legislation to make it possible for individuals who are already married, gay couples who are already married, to know that their marriage is safe and cannot be voided. As I have conversation with people around the country, the reality is anything can happen in Congress at this point in time, right? That which the Biden administration attempted to put into stone, that could change too. We don't know. What I do know is, and let me say too, I know plenty of couples who are running and getting married now. They weren't planning to get married right away, but for fear, they are. We don't know what we don't know. At the end of the day, I think we have to be able to stand together and support each other no matter what we face legislatively, whether it's at the federal level or at state levels. And anything can change. While we are fearing for the worst right now, and it may happen, it may not happen. If it does happen, we can stand together and know that we still have work that we can work toward, and equality and equity to work toward as well. And so that's what we've got to figure out. We won't know how to do that until we have to do it.
Yeah.
That's what's frustrating, to be honest. But I think that's where we're at. We don't know what's going to happen. And the way things are right now, we can get all worked up about something that we heard in the news cycle last night or this morning, and then by this evening or tomorrow morning, it could be different. So it is hard. And depending upon where people are in the country, I think particularly queer identifying folk, we are feeling the weight of what's happening in different ways, depending upon the state that you live in, depending upon the community that you're a part of. So that is another reason for me why I think it's important for AWAB to continue to show up where we can, to be present for folk, to know ultimately that we need to know that we are not alone. And again, while we can fear the worst, and the worst may happen, always will have the capacity to do something different about that which is in front of us.
Brian, one group within the LGBTQ plus community that is feeling the pressure of those attacks are our trans friends. And they're, feeling it seems like on a daily basis, from banning gender affirming care to forcing them to put gender identity that would not be of their choosing on driver's license. They're feeling the pressure all around them. I recently heard Brian Bond, the leader of PFLAG, speak about even conversation within LGBTQ organizations and the community about the possibility, we've made so many strides, should we be standing up for our trans friends at this moment in this time, in case it would set us all back? Bond, was very clear in, yes, the T within LGBTQ is not going anywhere, and we're standing by our trans friends. I know AWAB is doing the same thing. So tell us, how is Association Affirming and Welcoming Baptist advocating for our trans brothers and sisters out there who are feeling the pressures of politics these days?
It is so hard. And I can't put myself in the shoes of my trans and non-binary siblings because I'm not trans or non-binary.
Mhm.
And yet I sit alongside of my trans and non-binary siblings, and I hear their stories, and I hear the deep level of grief and anxiety that they are living with. In fact, I just had a conversation with a couple who are leaving the country for fear for the one partner's life.
Mhm.
I had a conversation with a family not long ago, family that is involved in ministry. Parents are clergy. They have a child who is trans, and they are literally having to think about packing up and moving themselves. Not only largely, obviously, primarily for fear of their child, but fear for themselves too. And depending upon what you're reading at this point in time, I mean, Missy, to your point, if worst case scenarios present themselves, parents could face criminal charges for being parents and loving their children.
Hmm.
So these are really difficult, hard times. AWAB will continue to do what it can to be present. One thing most recently, Mitch, that we did is in recognition of Trans Day of Visibility on March 31st, we published our second now annual Viewed in Voice, which is a newsletter written exclusively by trans and non-binary individuals. And so this year we had I think we had 10 or 11 individuals participate, and they shared their stories. They shared their art. They shared their writing, their poetry, their music. And so we have to do everything we can to continue to stand alongside of, to be supportive, to let our trans and non-binary siblings know that they are indeed viewed and voiced.
Well, Brian,
I
I appreciate all the work that AWAB is doing, has been doing for decades now. You can find out more about Brian's work at awab.org. And also subscribe and follow The Voice of the Turtle that now has 2 episodes out. And Brian is the
Yes.
host. It is a terrific podcast, and we were proud to be a producer of the podcast. And Brian and his team did a great job putting it all together. So thank you so much, Brian, for being with us this week on Good Faith Weekly.
Thank you. It's been wonderful to be here. I appreciate the two of you and Good Faith Media very, very much.
Well, Brian, before we let you go, though, we've got one last question that we're going to ask
Oh, no,
you.
what is that?
And Missy has the honor of asking it. So, Missy, take it away.
So, Brian, as you know, our tagline at Good Faith Media is "There's more to tell." So, in light of your work and our conversation today, what is your more to tell?
So I think my more to tell might be I am single and available. I'm joking. joking. That's
Hot off the presses,
Hot
you
off
guys.
the presses.
Just a
There we
joke.
go.
Just a joke. Maybe
It's not.
Maybe not. Maybe not. Maybe not. No, my more to tell, Missy, is this. There is always more to tell.
Mhm.
And that's one reason why I'm excited about Voice of the Turtle, because we, AWAB, we want to tell people stories, and we want people to hear the stories of our trans and non-binary siblings. We want to hear the stories of our gay and lesbian ancestors who for decades have been in the work, creating the way for queer folk like myself and so many today to be fully who we are and how we are. And my hope is, as we have more to tell, that we will be able to see more and more faith communities, Baptist congregations, come alongside their queer members and friends and do together what none of us can do on our own, especially when it comes to helping all of us as human beings live into the fullness of who we've been made to be.
That is a great way to end today's episode. Brian, thanks again. Again, the podcast is The Voice of the Turtle. Make certain to subscribe and listen wherever you listen to your podcast. It's a joy, my friend. You're always welcome at Good Faith Weekly.
Hey, thank you both again. Wonderful to be with you.
And to our audience, we want to thank you for tuning in. Missy and I are going to take next week off, but we'll be back in 2 weeks with our 300th episode. It's hard to believe. Until then, keep living good faith. You've been listening to Good Faith Weekly, hosted by Mitch and Missy Randall. This weekly podcast from Good Faith Media discusses matters of faith and culture.
Subscribe wherever you get your podcast and give us a like and a glowing review. We produce the podcast out of Norman, Oklahoma. Our music comes from Pond 5.
And we're supported by listeners like you. Learn more about us at goodfaithmedia.org.